This is Scott Horne of First Option Title, and in this video we're going to take a minute and just talk about title timelines. So if you like the video, guys, take a minute and like it, please. Take the time, make any comments below. We'll do our best to get back to you and answer those. And don't forget to jump over to our YouTube channel as well. So I'm here today with Gary, who's our National Director of Operations. So Gary, let's talk just about title timelines. You know, everybody wants a deal done yesterday. They get it opened on Monday. Well, why didn't it close on Sunday? You know, it's nonstop, and I get it. But let's just kind of take a minute and walk through reasonable timelines on title insurance and how that works from a closing perspective. So let's go start step by step. What's the first thing that has to happen?
Well, once we receive the title order, obviously a search is done to provide a commitment. In that case, you know, you're usually looking at anywhere from 2 to 4 days turnaround, depending on the property.
Yeah. Let me ask another question there. I want to stop you real quick. So, A, you got to have the contract first, right?
Yes, sir.
And typically we want earnest money to go along with that. But what if that property, you said 2 to 4 days, which that's customary, I think, anywhere you go. But what if this thing is in, you know, some way out middle of nowhere county? Is it going to take longer, shorter?
Sometimes it can, depending on the property, depending on what's in the search. What we would call a hairy title, meaning that there's a lot of items on the commitment. There's a lot of stuff that comes up in the search that needs to be waded through, if you will. Usually those are reviewed by the examiner. They're making sure that stuff actually attaches to that property. And then sometimes with those rural properties, deeds can go back quite a ways. Sometimes they can go back to the early 1900s. Families, you know, pass title on to sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters. So sometimes we're trying to do a timeline that brings it current, if you will. And that could take a little bit longer. But generally, still 2 to 4 days is generally a pretty good rule of thumb.
So that's a good rule of thumb. I like that a little bit. If it's out of county, as we call it in the title world, it could take an extra couple of days maybe and roll from there. So we get this commitment in, as they say. We have to review it. And that's where we see all the things that are on there. Maybe, you know, old mortgages that haven't been released. They're getting better, but you go back to like the real estate crash days, they were terrible. And all these banks had closed down, all these issues, and you couldn't get anything. And it was just, it was horrible. So you have to go back and find or try to get a release from that bank or go to the MERS, M-E-R-S system, right?
Yes, sir.
But that's time. It just doesn't happen. It's not some easy one little simple phone call sometimes. Sometimes you got to hunt this stuff down, and you got to deal with the seller or maybe even a prior seller, right?
That's correct. And sometimes we're dealing with a bank that purchased another bank that failed or was just absorbed by them. And then obviously it takes them a while in the curative process to go back through the records of the other banks to find out what is needed to remove that lien or judgment, if it's still an active loan, if it was you know, paid off and released, but a release was never given. Yeah, the crash really hurt a lot of things because a lot of lenders and banks closed down and really didn't follow through like they were supposed to and release those liens.
Yeah. And then, you know, the common things that, you know, that I think we see on a title report are things like a judgment lien. So what do you do if you see a judgment lien pop up on there, and how do you handle that?
So generally we'll reach out to the lien holder, find out obviously if the lien is still open or not. And if it is, we request a payoff. You know, we want an amount, a good through date, and a per diem, you know, because sometimes we don't know when something is going to close. But generally we reach out and do everything we can to get the items we need to close that for you. Okay,
so it can be removed off of the transaction. I guess there are some legal mechanisms with judgment liens that if you're buying a homestead and it really is the seller's judgment, if they want to wait 33 days or more to close the deal, there's a process for that legally to remove it. But typically, a payoff is a good way to handle that. I get it. Then you get good old child support liens, right?
Yeah, those come up quite often. In child support liens, depending on the type of transaction stuff, you know, if it's a sale, we try and get those absolved if we can. We reach out to the state. Usually that's where you got to get that information from, and you know, find out an amount, if it's payable. And generally those are paid through the state, but we see those quite often on property.
You know, I find it interesting just to kind of educate the world a little bit is if you have a husband and wife selling their home and there's a child support lien, You know, unfortunately, 99.9% of the time it's the husbands, it's not the wives, right? But here in Texas, because we are a community property state, the child support lien only attaches to the husband's 50%, not to the wife's 50%, right?
That is correct.
So I'm just guessing real quick with that if that's the case and there's money coming out, you know, you divide that money by two, the wife gets her 50%, but the husband has to pay out of his percentage, whatever that child support is.
Yeah, and it's not just with child support liens. We see that in a lot of things where maybe something only attaches to one member of that relationship. So that's not uncommon in our world to have to split payments out like that, because obviously a new spouse or a new partner obviously doesn't want to lose out on their share of
Right.
the transfer.
But again, that's a time issue. No, you're calling the state, you're trying to get information, and you're dealing with the government. They never move quick, right?
Never.
So the other type of liens that I think are most common are tax liens, whether it's property tax or that good old thing called the IRS, right?
Yes.
So those pop up. You know, it's really, I find it frustrating. You know, property tax liens are easy. That's kind of like a judgment lien. You just call the lien holder, get a payoff. Because those tax lien loans, if they're out there, they take super priority over everything. They got to go away. But then you get that IRS lien. And, you know, sometimes I find people, they want to negotiate with the IRS, do this, do that. Good luck. So you're trying to sell your home. There's what's called an FTL, or a federal tax lien out there. Notice a federal tax lien. Trying to call them and go through the time to negotiate takes forever. Much easier just to realize, okay, it's there, we got to pay it off, get a payoff. Those come quick, it's amazing. No, they'll give you a payoff real fast, but trying to negotiate to solve something, not at all.
I would agree with that. I've had clients in the past that wanted to hold off on closing because they wanted to negotiate with the IRS, and that's sometimes months.
Oh, it is.
That process is aggravating, especially when it's the seller doing it in this instance in a purchase, where sometimes you have a buyer who's like, I'm not going to wait, 90 days or 120 days. I've seen it take up to 6 months for somebody to get some of that resolved. They may have $30,000 in tax liens. They go through 6 months of negotiating, and that $30,000 goes down to $26,000. So,
and they lose the sale, right?
Yeah, and they lose the sale, and then maybe the market changes, and sure, they knock $4,000 off of what they owed the IRS, but now their house is worth $10,000 less based on the appraisal.
Yep. So first off, there's timing to get a commitment in. Everybody thinks it takes just a day. Sometimes it doesn't. There's a reasonable time frame to come in. Every deal's a little different based upon what is out there recorded in the record that none of us know until we get it. So there's time there. Then as we find things on that commitment, whether it's a judgment lien, a child support lien, a tax lien, a mortgage lien, things have to be removed, more time to resolve those issues. And there are just time processes. Another thing that I see, and although this one is not as bad, is getting information from a lender that the buyer may be using, because we can't do anything until we get their information, whether it's preparing a settlement statement or especially a CD or a closing disclosure, right?
Yeah, I find in a lot of the traditional closings over the years that I've been doing this, that's a lot of where the stall happens, if you will. We're ready. We've got everything, payoffs that need to be done. We've got the tax cert in. We've confirmed that taxes are either paid or there's an amount owed through the closing date. And then all of a sudden, the lender's not ready. It hasn't gone through their underwriting. It has to go through their underwriting for the third time. So a lot of times the hiccup comes when the lender gets involved, where basically we're all waiting on the lender to get everything on their end done, whether it's getting their docs drawn, which is generally a process that we have to wait for. But like I said, a lot of loans have to go through the lender's underwriting process multiple times.
Yep. So, so I get all that. There's rarely any perfect closing. Then there's a survey issue could pop up. Maybe a homeowners association or the HOA information we have to get in, where they want to get paid up front, for a survey or for that. The lender can be slowing down because of an appraisal. Usually not so much there, but there's all types of little things that can can occur in a closing that just slow it down a little bit. And I know that especially in the investor world, investors, as I said in the very beginning, all want to close yesterday or the day before. And sometimes you can move pretty quickly, but there's a reasonableness factor that you have to expect and anticipate in any deal that's out there. Just, you know what gets me, Gary, is I see all these people advertise everything. We can close your deal in 24 hours. We can close it in 3.5 days. Yeah, let's go malarkey. You know, you never know, right?
Yeah, I would say that maybe they can close it in 3 days because they're doing the minimum part of the work, right?
Yep.
But it really comes down to what we find on title, how long that takes, how long it takes to cure the process. And then if there's a lender involved, like I said, you're hamstrung. Nothing happens until the lender is ready. So you can make all the promises that you want, and most of the time I feel like those unrealistic expectations aren't met, and the plan is generally there is that person blames everybody else, right?
They do. You know, what I also find so interesting about this industry is the purchasers, especially their investor, they want to get it done just immediately. They're usually working on one deal. And I hope that they understand that as a title operation, we're working on 20, 30, 50 at a time. And every one of those files want the exact same thing. And I wish we could work on one deal only at a single time, but you can't stay in business doing that. And it's just understanding that we know that that's your deal. We know it's important. We know you want to get it done because you want to make money. We get it. But there's just a process you have to go through to get things done, to do it the right way. And pushing and calling every 3 minutes just doesn't help. It just slows you down.
And you hit the nail right on the head, Scott. I like to, and my teams, to set expectations once we get the commitment, right? If we see, 4 or 5 judgments on there, we see an IRS lien, the person's like, well, I'm in the middle of negotiating with the IRS right now. We've got an open lien that looks like, for an open mortgage, say, from a bank that's closed. Those may take some time. So I like to set expectations at the start. But at the same time, I think, as I said, you hit the nail on the head. We want to make sure everything is correct. So when we do the search, when we work the curative, we want to make sure that everything is clean. When you get a new property, that everything's been removed properly, there's nothing hanging out there. We make sure that the person that's transferring the property to you has 100% interest in that property so that you have 100% interest.
That just keyed me into something, the 100% interest. Oh my goodness. We get these contracts that come in, and the investor who's buying this property thinks they have all they need, that one signature or 2 signatures. And then there's probate stuff that pops up, and we have to put this together. And all of a sudden, there's not 1 or 2 heirs, there's 5. And you need everybody's signature. And those things just take time. And, one of the things that I know we do a lot of, Gary, is we do here in Texas what is called an affidavit of heirship, an AOH, as we say. And the seller of the property, the heirs, they have to fill it out and give it to us. And investors think that that's going to happen overnight. It doesn't. The title company are not lawyers. They don't complete these things. They don't draft this stuff. Lawyers draft it. And of course, when a lawyer is calling the heir to get the information, send the questionnaire, we always have to ask questions. No, it's not just get a form, fill it out, and go. No, because what I see so often in this industry is the investor is buying the house from the estate of, we'll call it mom. Well, the first question I always ask is, was there a dad? Were mom and dad married when they bought this house? Did they get divorced? Did dad pass away? Did you do probate work for dad when he passed away? And I will tell you right now, 95% of the time, that's the case. And nobody did any work for dad. It's all assumed that mom got it. So now what we have to do is not do 1 heirship affidavit, we got to do 2. And then what pops up is maybe there's 5 children, maybe 1 has passed away. Then maybe they had 3 children, maybe 1 of those passed. You go through this pecking order, and I always try to suggest to investors to help organize that up front if possible, just to expedite things. But I just find that they miss out on some of these questions. And again, it slows everything down. and you're waiting on third parties to get stuff to you that you just can't control. But everybody thinks we can control that, and you really can't.
No, you can't. I'll go one step further with the affidavit of heirship. Based on the rules here in Texas, is what'll complicate it even more is if one of those parents, if the deceased party, say, had children outside the marriage.
That's always fun.
That adds another, shade on title, because those children inherit as well.
That's right.
And sometimes you have a case where this is dad's second marriage, he had children from his first marriage or maybe a high school sweetheart, and he has a son out there that wife number two doesn't get along with, hasn't ever talked to. It's been 20 years since dad's spoken to him, but their interest needs to be taken care of. I tell people with an affidavit of heirship, you're looking at a minimum of 10 days, minimum, just because of getting it drawn up, getting it out to everybody, having them sign. Let's not forget, with an affidavit of heirship, folks, you need 2 witnesses, and those witnesses get notarized. Then you find out who the heirs are. Then you have to send out deeds and everything to them. And a lot of times, the way the country is nowadays, dad and mom had 5 kids, right? And 2 of them live on the West Coast, 1 of them lives on the East Coast, 1 of them lives down in Florida, and 1 lives out in Montana in the middle of the woods, right? So in those cases, that's time consuming. You've got to send a notary out or have them go into to an office to sign those. So I always tell people, if an affidavit of heirship is going to be used, it's going to be a minimum of 10 days, because even if everything happens in a timely manner, all those things go out, it's a process. So, everybody's not sitting by their mailbox waiting for your mail to come in, right?
No, they're not.
So they can sign it, put it in an envelope, and send it back to you that day. People are people. So, they get it. They're like, oh, yeah, I'll look at this tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, they look at it, they sign it, they get it notarized if it needs to be notarized. And then it's like, well, it's already 6:30, I'm late for dinner with the wife, I'll just mail this out from work tomorrow. Well, that little process right there was 3 of those days. So, understanding that when there's a deceased party, especially if there hasn't been a probated will, there's a considerable process that takes, and there's nothing we can do to hurry that up. But again, it's about doing it right and making sure you get that 100% interest clean and clear when you get that deed.
There's a couple things. You brought to mind a few things. One is there's a changing wind out there right now where I'm seeing some of the title underwriters wanting all the heirs to sign for fraud purposes. I've had that happen where they just omit various people because of greed. Got it. That's why they want everybody to sign off on it for validation. And I could sit here and tell you so many fun stories, about finding people. We talked about the person up in Montana, somewhere in the woods. 8 heirs, all out of the Utah area. They hadn't seen one in 20 years. And we're going, oh my goodness. We get a PI involved, private investigator. She had worked for some law firm in, I think, Idaho. And we thought she was going to be in some commune somewhere, disappeared off the face of the earth. Nope, got her immediately. Sometimes you just get lucky, but you know what? Sometimes you don't. And you got to deal with that. So there's an expectation out there of doing those kind of things. And I hope that our clients understand that although the title company can do some of that work, that's called curative again, which is outside the scope of title, which becomes a seller expense to cure up their probate issues, right?
Correct.
And someone has to do that work. Someone has to pay for all that. And in our investor world, nobody wants to pay for it. We all investors are cheap, which I understand out there. But I think it's really a good understanding from people who are closing and buying real estate. There are time frames. There are processes. Some can be really short, sweet, and easy. And everybody wants to push it that way. I get it. They want to tell their sellers they're going to close it so fast. And then all these things start to pop up that nobody knows, that nobody anticipates. Judgment liens, child support liens, old mortgage liens, this, that. It's time and more time. Probate issues, all types of things happen that just start creating the delays. And unfortunately, what I find is the fingers all get pointed right back at us because all those delays are all our fault, even though they're really not our fault. But it's just the nature of the business. And I think it's really helping the industry understand in the basic overview of this business, things happen. You're going to discover things that you may not know they thought you knew everything and you don't know everything. It's just the nature of business, and get used to it.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of times with title companies, it's a case of shoot the messenger, right? We did not pay their taxes.
I am full of holes, baby.
We did not pay their mortgage, but because we bring it to light, all of a sudden it's our fault, right? So we see that quite often. You just kind of have to let the person get their anger out and vent at you. As I always tell my staff, there's no magical app out there that lets somebody reach through the phone and punch you in the nose. So let them vent, let them yell, let them do what they're going to do. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? And as you said, a lot of times people are like, well, who's going to pay for that? Well, unfortunately, ma'am, sir, you are, because this is your property, it's your issue. We can bring the issue to light. We can tell you how to cure it, but we're not private investigators. We're not attorneys, right? We're not the bank that holds the lien. Sometimes you pay extra for things that you need to clear up your property. Again, these aren't our fault. We're just bringing them to light. And I think sometimes people just need somebody to be mad at, and we're the easy person to do that with.
I just tell the girls, be nice. It's all you can do. Get the information, hang the phone up, scream, move on.
Exactly.
And you get it done. But it does take time, and it's helping the industry understand these issues a little bit, and getting an idea. And just don't create these unreasonable expectations. And so long as you get a better feel for this, as you do this business more and more, you've been doing this 25 plus years. I've been doing it 30, I don't want to say 5 plus years. And you see everything. You run into everything. And it will always be different. Sometimes it's easy. Got it. We love those. And sometimes it ain't, right?
Correct.
So guys, I hope this helps you understand just a little bit about the things that we run into in the title industry, the things that we have to work on and cure, the time frames, waiting for third parties to get back, realizing that we're not just working on one file at a time. There are many going on, and we're truly trying to get it done because, you know what? End of the day, Gary, I always say, if that deal don't close, there ain't nobody getting paid.
That's true.
The buyer's not getting their money. The seller's not getting theirs. We as a title company's not getting ours. We want to get the deal done. We want to get it closed. That's what we're here to do. We want to make money. We all want to make money. So we're not trying to kill a deal. But you have to work through it properly to get to that point. And I hope it's just having an understanding of those kind of things, that everybody is working together to get there. And I hate to say it this way, for one last little closing remark is, sometimes it just doesn't happen.
That's true. There's some cases where we have to go back and say, we can't close this. Now, us in particular, we always try and not just say no, but say no with a solution. Like, we can't close this right now, but if you do A, B, C and get those taken care of and come back to us, then we can close it for you.
Yep.
Sometimes, again, we bring to light the issue. If the issue is such that we can't close that property until it's taken care of, we'll at least let you know. We'll try and give you a path to victory, right? As Scott said, we want to close all these loans. That's how we make money. That's how we feed our families. Nobody's more excited to get your loan closed than we are. But sometimes it's just not doable in the state it's currently in. So again, we may say no now, but it's no with here's steps to follow to correct that, and then come back to us and we can give you a yes.
That goose agrees with you too, you know it? Anyway, that is, right on point. And I'll give you this a real life example. Within the last, just this week, working on a deal that I started working on July of last year, probate, 2 minor children, no wills, no guardians. They had to go through all these legal processes. They finally got it done, brought it back, and we're closing it for them this week.
Excellent.
So, guys, I hope this video helped you out understanding a few of the issues about the title industry, time issues, and what you need to know that will help you navigate your transaction better. So, guys, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please take a minute and like it. Make any comments below. We'll do our very best to answer those questions for you. Come over and see us on our YouTube channel. We're going to go goose hunting. See you guys later.